Do you ever look around and think, wow, the world is a crazy place, and it just seems to get crazier and crazier? Ease your mind and take a break. This is Fuel for the Soul with John Giftah. We're a hub for inspirational Christian sermons, practical keys for Christian living, and Christian discussions and interviews. You'll be inspired to live the life that you were created for. Your host is a top-ranking podcaster, best-selling author, world record holder, aerospace engineer, life coach, evangelist, and founder of John Giftah International. Welcome to Fuel for the Soul with John Giftah.
I'm going to talk to you today about discerning God's best for your life. Yes, in life we all have to make decisions, choices, maybe with regard to your career, relationships, marriage, or it could be maybe a house that you need to purchase, or any decision that you need to make with regard to your business, your opportunity for the future, or maybe a studying or course that you need to take up, or some kind of an opportunity that will be with regard to your dreams, your desires, or your ambitions, whatever the Lord has been leading you, directing your steps towards your calling, your purpose, your ministry, your maybe it could be something like a YouTube channel or whatever the Lord has been speaking to you about. One of the things I want to talk to you about is, how do you discern, when you have to make a choice on what to choose, when you have to decide on something, how do you discern this is God's best for you, this is God's will for you? And the Lord was just sharing something with me, and I thought this was such a powerful word. When you look at Genesis chapter 22, you have to understand something here, that God's promise to Abraham, the promised son, was not Ishmael, it was Isaac, right? God's promised son for him was Isaac. Even though Abraham made some poor choices, he didn't wait on God, he thought he should help God, ended up with the Ishmael, which ended up in a lot of trouble, and we still have those troubles to this day. But when you look at Isaac, there's something that really caught my attention. How do you know this is God's will or God's best for him? In Genesis chapter 22, the Lord wanted to test Isaac, right? And God is leading Abraham and saying, I want you to go and sacrifice your only son, Isaac. Even though that was not his only son, Ishmael was also his son, but then God was referring specifically to the promised son, the only son, to reinforce and tell, I know how much Isaac means to you. He's the promised chosen son. Now I want you to sacrifice him. And a lot of times we have this perception that Isaac was somebody who was a very young boy. He didn't know much. Maybe he was just in his innocent young self, that he just followed his dad and things like that. But there's something I want you guys to focus on. The Bible talks about in verse 6, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife, and the two of them went together. When you have to understand, they were not just going normally, they were climbing, right, a mountain. God was going to ask him to sacrifice this son on one of the mountains in the region of Moriah. Now think about this. It was not an easy thing, carrying in a mountain terrain or climbing. And if you understand in that context, you realize that Isaac was not just a tiny little boy. And according to some studies, he was probably in his early 20s by the time this incident happened. Okay? He was not a young innocent boy who knew nothing. This guy was old enough to understand what was happening. He was intellectually in a good place. That's how he was able to ask his dad. In verse 7, he says, the fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? So he is able to think. He's having the intellectual power. He's able to understand that, this seems to be some kind of a problem. So he was not dumb, he was not stupid. So what I want you guys to understand today here is this important truth, that Isaac was capable to make decisions. He was capable, and he had the stamina and the physical strength on his side, because Abraham was an old man. He was over 100 and probably around 120 or something. And here was this young, vibrant young man at the age of around his early 20s, who had the ability to, overpower his dad and say, what do you mean you want to sacrifice me, huh? What do you think of yourself, huh? Even when Abraham was tying him up, the Bible is putting it so beautifully, right? That Abraham said, yes, God will provide. But when they reached there, he bound his son. Verse 9 says, bound his son and laid him on the altar. You don't see anything about Isaac retaliating, fighting back, even though he had the ability, even though he could do it, even though he was physically strong. What I want you guys to understand is, the God's best, when God gives you, right, that God's best will never go against God's will. God's best will never go against God's will. God's best will go in sync with God's will and God's plan. That is the key I want you guys to understand. How do you discern something is God's best for your life? It is something that complements God's plan for your life, that goes hand in hand with God's will for your life, that does not oppose God's will. See, if Abraham resisted, or if Isaac resisted, it was going to be resistance against God. And you see here beautifully that Isaac did not resist what God was doing. God was testing Abraham, but God was also testing Isaac. And that is a beautiful picture where you understand that what is God's will always, go hand in hand with God's will and God's best, God's plan for your life. And that's what I want you to understand. That's how you realize that Isaac was the chosen one for Abraham, the chosen son, the promised son, right? That's what I want you guys to understand. Even if you're making a choice, whatever choice you have to make in your career, for example, what is God's best for you in your job? That is not going to affect God's call over your life. If you wait for God's best, even if you're choosing the life partner, the one that God brings in is going to be the best, who will also stand in to support you in the call of God over your life. That's what I want you guys to understand. Isaac, the promised son, did not resist or oppose what God was doing in Abraham's life. The promised son that God gives you, the promised person God gives you, the promised one that God gives you, will not be against what God has ordained or planned and purposed for your life. Amen. God bless you.
You've been listening to Fuel for the Soul with John Giftah. We hope you were blessed and inspired to live the life that God has for you. Make sure to subscribe to the John Giftah YouTube channel for regular uploads of sermons, skits, interviews, and more. Follow John Giftah on Instagram for regular inspirational posts. And don't forget to check out the best-selling books written by John Giftah, Who Am I?, which will help you understand your identity, and the latest #1 bestseller, Unveil Your Purpose, helping you discover your purpose and to start walking in it. Make sure to leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends and loved ones. If you'd like to donate, you can find the PayPal link in the description. And if you'd like to invite John Giftah to speak at your event or to get more details, go to the website at www.johngiftah.com. See you on the next episode of The Fuel for the Soul with John Giftah. God bless you.